Breaking Friday night. Tonight, the disparity between President Trump and the Democrats vying to take his job could not be more clear. The president spent the day today in California working to fix a serious, significant crisis going on right now on our southern border. Now, meanwhile, several 2020 Democrats, they spent the day in beautiful New York City pandering to so-called Reverend Al Sharpton. Coming up, we're going to just show you how pathetic, how absolutely extreme and out of touch this party has become. It's actually serious and dangerous. First, we turn to our Hannity watch on the very real crisis going on tonight at our southern border. Just a few hours ago, President Trump wrapped up an important visit to California where he attended a roundtable discussion with security officials toward a section of the U.S.-Mexico border where the wall is now under construction. And today, the president emphasized the importance of border security in light of what is a mounting illegal immigration crisis, a real crisis every day. Watch this.
It's a colossal surge, and it's overwhelming our immigration system, and we can't let that happen. So, as I say, and this is our new statement, the system is full. Can't take you anymore. Whether it's asylum, whether it's anything you want, it's illegal immigration. Can't take you anymore. We can't take you. Our country is full. Our area is full. The sector is full. Can't take you anymore. I'm sorry. Can't happen. So turn around. That's the way it is.
What is happening at the border is not a manufactured crisis. Democrats, the media have been lying to you again. Obama's former Border Patrol chief, Mark Morgan, just testified that, quote, we are experiencing a crisis to the magnitude never experienced in modern times. He worked for Obama. Morgan also told the Senate committee that 650,000 illegal immigrants will likely be freed into the United States this year alone. Morgan also noting violent gang members' apprehensions, they have gone up 50%. This year, security officials are on pace to apprehend over 1 million illegal immigrants. For reference, Delaware, South Dakota, North Dakota, Alaska, Vermont, Wyoming all have under 1 million residents. This is the major crisis we have been telling you about. Others have been lying about. Look at your screen. Just last night, our friend, investigative reporter, contributor Lawrence Jones witnessed Border Patrol agents again apprehending 8 illegal immigrants walking across the Rio Grande like he did the night before. This is new video. We're going to have that exclusive coverage with Lawrence at the border coming up. But make no mistake, President Trump is fighting to secure the border with miles and miles of new wall, additional agents, and all the new technologies available. And importantly, the president is holding Mexico accountable. Now, today he doubled down on his threat to close the border, tweeting, quote, if for any reason Mexico stops apprehending and bringing the illegals back to where they came from, the U.S. will be forced to tariff at 25% all cars made in Mexico and shipped over the border to the U.S. If that doesn't work, which it will, I will close the border. Meanwhile, Democrats are taking a much different approach. Ahead of the president's visit to California today, the state's Democratic Attorney General said all illegal immigration should be decriminalized because, quote, they haven't committed a crime against someone. Well, except those who disregard our laws and cut in front of the line ahead of hard-working legal immigrants from all backgrounds, legal immigrants who respect our sovereignty, our rule of law, Constitution, our borders, people that in some cases spend years of their lives navigating what is a complex immigration system. Doctors, scientists, teachers, translators, loved ones who want to follow our laws and, yes, become part of our family and make America even greater. But you rarely hear Democrats, a so-called party of compassion, advocating for legal immigrants. In fact, they weren't even interested in passing a solution to DACA or helping dreamers because the bill included what they supported in the second term of Obama, a border wall and funding, and they were worried it would look like a political victory for the president. They cared more about raging and hating Donald Trump than they did about immigrants, dreamers, DACA. Democrats only interested in playing identity politics and once again scoring cheap political points. I look at Senator Kamala Harris when she compared ICE to the Ku Klux Klan, or more recently when Robert Francis, Beto, Bozo, O'Rourke comparing President Trump's immigration rhetoric Oh, to Nazi Germany. Watch this.
The President of the United States has called Mexican immigrants rapists and criminals. He then went on to call asylum seekers animals and an infestation. Now, we would not be surprised in the Third Reich other human beings were described as an infestation, as a cockroach or a pest that you would want to kill. But to do that in 2017 or 18 in the United States of America, it doesn't make sense.
The Identity Politics Party, they know no bounds. Every 2-4 years, you know the drill. We tell you all the time, all their opponents, they're racist, sexist, misogynist, they're homophobic, xenophobic, Islamophobic, want dirty air, water, throw granny over the cliff, and they hate children. They want them to die. Now, everyone who disagrees with them on anything, well, now is a Nazi. And remember, Robert Francis, he wants to take down any barriers. That's why Democratic Mayor Hopeful Pete Buttigieg is now apologizing for a statement he made in 2015 when he dared to say the following: all lives matter. Well, I think we're all created by the same God, every human being on earth. I guess I'll be apologizing one day for believing that God created every human soul on this earth. Watch this.
What I did not understand at that time was that that phrase, just early into mid, especially 2015, was coming to be viewed as a sort of counter slogan to Black Lives Matter. And so this statement that seems very anodyne and something that's kind of nobody could be against actually wound up being used to devalue what the Black Lives Matter movement was telling us, which is what we needed to hear, because unfortunately it was not obvious to everybody that black lives were being valued the same.
All right, the mayor obviously forgot that in the radical extreme new Democratic Socialist Party, I guess some lives matter than other lives. This week, well, he joined 11 other Democratic 2020 hopefuls at Al Sharpton's National Action Network convention, where I proudly once debated him and actually brought tapes of Al Sharpton with me. It was the most, popular event of the year. Democratic primary now runs through a man, inciting violence in New York City. And perpetrating a race-based hoax in the 80s. And someone who, by the way, could forget some of these moments from, let's say, the greatest hits of Al Sharpton. This is who they want approval from, who they must get the endorsement of. Wow. Watch.
I'm tired of the American bitch. You ain't nothing. You a punk. Now come on, do something.
We're the best chicken fries in the universe. And we don't like some kind of sandwich chicken. Folks was in the cave when we had built empires. We learned to admire them, but they knew to admire us. We built pyramids before Donald Trump ever knew what architecture was. Yes. You want to be the only on television. The only in the newspaper. The only can talk.
Imagine if a Republican or conservative had said that. You think that any Republican would seek the endorsement of somebody like that? No. And that's nothing compared to the racist, anti-Semitic, homophobic Democratic ally, Louis Farrakhan. Here he is with former President Obama. They hid this picture, for his entire run and his entire 8 years as president. They concealed that picture from public view. And here he is last night on stage with former President Bill Clinton, it was a while back, and Al Sharpton and the Reverend Jesse Jackson, despite the fact that Farrakhan has routinely called Jews termites and the white people the devil and the skunk of the planet Earth and Judaism a gutter religion. Well, still, top Democrats have been cozying up to Farrakhan for decades. Recently, Screwy Louie told his Nation of Islam followers that he is Jesus. This is right up there when he says he was transported to a mother ship that hovers above the earth. He really said that too. But listen to this.
To the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan, you are the Messiah of the world. Look at this. And you are the Messiah to every human who wants to be civilized.
that man is considered a leader within the Democratic Party. Why did Obama hide that picture for the whole 8 years he was president and even before? So 2020 contenders, are they going to condemn Farrakhan? Or will the party of compassion continue to make excuses for his vile racism and virulent anti-Semitism and bigotry? Now, Sean Spicer, Tammy Bruce will be here to discuss that in just a moment. First, we turn our Hannity watch. More updates on creepy, crazy Uncle Joe Biden. Today, he made his first public appearance since multiple women, now at least 7, have accused him of inappropriate conduct. And, well, it seems like crazy Uncle Joe Biden is doing his best to just laugh the whole thing off. Take a look.
I just want you to know I had permission to hug Lonnie. We had permission. All along, but it's up to me. By the way, he gave me permission to touch him.
Oh, where was the, I'm sorry, where are all the I believe people? What happened to the, women must be respected? Where's that group that was attacking Justice Kavanaugh and so many other Republicans, the ones that aren't speaking out about the lieutenant governor accused of rape and violent sexual assault against 2 separate women in Virginia, the lieutenant governor there? Is that the Democratic Party motto? If you're on the left, don't worry. No allegations, no accusations of misconduct matter. Nothing's disqualifying. If you're a Republican, if you're a conservative, if your name is Donald Trump or you know Donald Trump, if you say one nice thing about Donald Trump, then it's guilt by accusation. No due process, no presumption of innocence. Today, during an impromptu press conference, Biden refused again to even offer a direct apology. Wow. Take a look.
I'm sorry I didn't understand more. I'm not sorry for any of my intentions. I'm not sorry for anything that I have ever done. I've never been disrespectful intentionally to a man or a woman.
Sorry for not understanding? How about you sorry for what you did? The nose rubbing, the hair smelling, the grabbing, massaging, kissing on the lips, grabbing close, uncomfortable. Anyway, today before his important trip to the border, the president was asked if creepy Uncle Joe posed a political threat. And here's how the president responded to this. Take a look.
I don't see Joe Biden as a threat. No, I don't see him as a threat. I think he's only a threat to himself. I just don't see him as a threat. He's been there a long time. His record's not good. He'd have to run on the Obama failed record. You look at what happened with so many different things. North Korea, the Middle East, the economy never got going. No, I don't think Joe's a threat. I'd love him to be. I mean, look, I'd be happy with any of them, to be honest.
As we approach the 2020 election, you'll notice a stark contrast between the president and the Democrats. This will be the biggest choice election in 2020 in our lifetime. One side, you're going to hear real solutions to real problems and real progress. You're going to hear about the economy, how it is booming, record low unemployment, the lowest in 50 years. You'll also hear about America's successful military campaign against ISIS, our successful policy of peace through strength, the greatest alliance with the state of Israel we have ever had, recognizing Jerusalem as its rightful capital, and that the Golan Heights are Israel's. There's never been a greater bond. 2 people with moral clarity, Churchillian figures, Netanyahu leading the way, and now he has a partner in President Trump. You're going to hear about trade deals, new NATO agreements, the historic tax cuts, the end of burdensome regulation, and for the first time in 70 years, we are energy independent, and we are now a net exporter of energy. As it stands, the United States of America, thanks to this president, is now the largest producer of oil and natural gas in the world. Oh, those people that hate us, we don't need their oil anymore. And by the way, we might be able to go against the hostile regime of Putin and the hostile actors in Russia and actually help out our Western European allies, all because of energy. Oh, they don't want to get rid of gas and oil in 10 years, the Democrats. That's what you get from them. Very different. No solutions, no successes, gloom, doom, endless investigation, a heavy, heavy nonstop dose of identity politics and division in this country to denigrate American greatness, grab power, false promises of a socialist utopia that will never be met. Here with us now, Fox News contributor Tammy Bruce and America First Action senior advisor Sean Spicer. You know, it's really hard to understand the double standard. You know, if I look at the lieutenant governor of Virginia and the serious accusations of rape and violent sexual assault to women, they say nothing. Then you compare it to Kavanaugh and everything else. And then this case, you know, Joe Biden won't apologize. Why is this allowed to exist? Tammy.
Well, obviously, this is politics for a very long time, and I've argued now for 15, 20 years that the left's arguments really aren't about the principles or policies at all, that they're convenient. That the Democrats have been grifters for a very long time. They take an issue that they know is important to the American people and write it to death, and then use it to simply gain more power while doing nothing, if not even making the issue more of a problem. So this was one of my points with Kavanaugh, is that when you're using something as a political cudgel, you're harming the issue itself. You're taking seriousness away from it. And then lo and behold, look at this. We've worked separate from, you know, this is not a zero game here where it's all Harvey Weinstein type accusations versus nothing. That in fact we've worked for decades to educate people about the issue of sexual harassment. And now look, you've got Joe Biden going up in his speech joking about it, just dismissing the nature of behavior that, if it was done in a workplace, would have serious repercussions, and importantly so, because this is about the sense of women's ability to be taken seriously, to not be touched without being asked, if at all, in the workplace. And yet now it's almost like we've lost a decade of work because of the Democrats' concerns about politics. So this should show the American people, but Democrats as well, grassroots Democrats, that their leadership has been misleading them. The leadership is not serious. Its leadership is using them. And I would encourage all independents and Democrats. It's not about changing your point of view or where you stand on the issues. Realize that the people who've asked you to vote for them have been frauds for a very long time, and look around you, African American, gays and lesbians, and women, that your lives, in fact, are not getting better based on the Democrat narrative, but in fact are getting better because of the conservative ideal as now being implemented by the current president.
Let me go to the crisis at the border with you, Sean, and ask you, as the president's down there today, story out of Louisiana, a guy that previously was convicted, sex offender, registered illegal immigrant back in the country. Headline, 100-plus child sex crime charges in Louisiana. You look at the statistics, in 2 years, 4,000 homicides, 30-plus thousand sexual assaults, 100,000 violent assaults by illegal immigrant criminals, sometimes protected, aided and abetted by sanctuary city-state policies. When do we start caring about the American family, the moms and dads that lost their kids, the women in this country that have been violently assaulted, and others? When does the 90% of heroin leading to 300 deaths a week, 90% of it coming across that border, when does that become the priority instead of this lie about a manufactured crisis?
Well, it should be the priority at all times. I mean, that's why countries have borders, is that you can protect your people. The number one job of any form of government, whether it's local, state, or federal, is to protect the people that they serve and that live within that jurisdiction. The president going down to the border today really highlights and illuminates the issue at hand. And for all those people who have said that we didn't have a crisis and that it was manufactured, seeing the border firsthand and seeing what's going on down there, I think really brings to light a focus and an image that would otherwise be absent from this discussion. So good on the president for going down there and really drawing attention to what's happening down there, because it's only through the president going down and highlighting these visits, bringing angel moms to the White House, allowing them to talk about their stories and their tragedies and the loved ones that they have lost, has this issue been kind of brought into the center. One anchor on a competing network the other night reported down from the border and said, you know, it is now a crisis here. It takes, sadly, going down there. And it shouldn't. We shouldn't have to. If we know there's a problem, you know, if this was a crime spree in a local county, a local city or a town, we wouldn't have to say, well, show us the problem. We'd have police out there, neighborhood watches. We know this is a problem, and this shouldn't be a political debate.
Great
Sean,
point.
one more thing. I know Tammy brought up great points on Biden. There's 3 things I'd say. She was absolutely right. The idea that he's joking about it is wrong. Number 2, he blamed the right wing, which I think is unbelievable that he got a pass on that.
Yeah, it's my fault.
And third,
he's rubbing noses, smelling hair.
And he said times have changed. No, Mr. Vice President, times have never changed. Times have not changed. Being creepy and inappropriately touching another person was never acceptable.
Correct.
And I think that's what he's missed in this.
All right. Thank you both.
Thanks,
when we
guys.
come back, exclusive Hannity footage you won't see anywhere else about the real crisis on the border in Texas. Look at this. Our own Lawrence Jones is next with the Texas Lieutenant Governor, Dan Patrick. You will see more arrests from last night, different from the night before that we got on tape. And later, the left hyperventilating over Robert Mueller's report. How wrong do they want to be? How long will they hang on to their tinfoil hat conspiracy theories? Rudy Giuliani is with us tonight.
Services fraud, those each carry a penalty possibility of 20 years. And I want to point something out for viewers why this is such a big deal. Prosecutors use both of these charges as a significant leveraging tool because of the high and long penalty associated with them, right? And you don't have to prove that there was a public loss of funds in the honest services charge. So bear with me on these stats, but basically 97% of federal defendants plead guilty. And of those, almost 50% get sentences below the sentencing guidelines. So there's a benefit to pleading out, right? And of those half, almost 60% are because the government recommended it. And the average sentence for that kind of fraud is 26 months. So my point is that while these individuals are facing literally 40 years in prison, the average, if they plead out because of the decades they're facing, is actually only about 26 months. So it behooves all of them actually not to fight this if the evidence is overwhelming. Otherwise, they will be facing a long time in prison.
And they didn't volunteer for the Trump campaign in 2016, so they're probably not going to get 30 years, is, I guess, part of what you're saying. Interesting.
Exactly.
One last question. Has anyone from the colleges been charged?
No, however, the Department of Education has launched a probe into it, and that includes potential for criminal referral charges to the DOJ. Now, essentially, the colleges are under obligations, obviously, as steward of funds and also to uphold federal compliance. And there's a whole host, essentially, of requirements that they have to adhere to. So, essentially, the federal government is conducting an extensive probe, including how they conduct their application processes, especially in the realm of student athletes. And it remains to be seen whether, depending on the data found in that probe, whether it's referred for criminal charges.
Interesting. Huh. Yeah. It's a bigger deal maybe than we realized at first, legally.
Absolutely.
Emily Capano, thanks very much for that summary. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Well, Joe Biden says he won't apologize for hugging people. Press is mad at him. They believe Biden must submit or be destroyed. We'll have the latest on that story after the break. Prince Harry of the British Isles recently made news when he told people he plans to raise his child in a gender-neutral way. But that's not Prince Harry's only view on parenting. Not all of his views are insane. After a recent meeting with mental health experts, he said that Fortnite, that's the world's most popular video game offered for free online, ought to be banned. A central part of the game is so-called loot boxes. These grant digital rewards to players. The boxes and other features of the game make it deeply addictive, perhaps as much or more as drugs and alcohol. Prince Harry says the government and parents should act instead of, quote, waiting for the damage to be done. Tom Kirsting is a psychotherapist, author of the book Disconnected, How to Reconnect Our Digitally Distracted Kids, and he joins us tonight. Tom, thanks for coming on.
Thank you, Tom.
So, what do you make of this? I've read many stories about the popularity of Fortnite, ubiquitous among young people playing for days at a time. I haven't read a whole lot on what the bad effects of it might be. What are they?
It is. It's very addictive. That would be accurate. And here's why. It's a game that's highly stimulating. It gets the brain going. It kicks in the body's sympathetic nervous system, so you get an adrenaline rush, like most video games. But there's also a sort of reward involved. You have things like skins, the other thing that you mentioned. There's also, for the player, you have the ability to build things. There's a teamwork element. You aim and things of that nature. So all of those things coupled, especially for kids, creates sort of a psychological reward, all right? And it activates the part of the brain that reduces dopamine, the same substance that you'll get from doing drugs. So, you know, addiction is basically that in a nutshell. And you have kids that are playing this and getting this sort of psychological reward constantly. They crave that. And that's how you get addicted. And there's lots and lots of stories I could share if we had time.
Okay, and I believe it, and anecdotal evidence backs you up. I mean, you're always meeting people whose kids are, quote, addicted to Fortnite.
Right.
What's the downside of being addicted to Fortnite?
Well, the downside is what I'm seeing as a therapist and when I'm out lecturing. I mean, I just gave a lecture last night. We talked about Fortnite. The downside is that what happens is kids aren't paying attention as much in school because that's all they're thinking about when they're sitting in class. They can't wait to get home and play Fortnite, all right? They're spending a lot of time after school playing Fortnite, which is compromising their academic work. It's leading to arguments with parents. There's chaos in the household. Anybody watching right now, any parent whose kid has Fortnite has likely argued with that child. To me, the biggest downside, what I'm saying is the game is recommended for children over the age of 12, and there are countless kids under the age of 12, as young as 6 years old, playing this game.
So it seems to supplant human contact, though. If you're spending hours a day playing Fortnite, you're basically locked in a fantasy world without other living people in it, right?
That's right. I mean, the other argument that people might make is you could put a headset on and you could play with your friends, which creates interaction. But that's not real interaction. There's nothing better than actual face-to-face interaction and picking up on the nonverbal nuances and stuff of the people in front of us.
So a society whose leaders tell us so often they care about children, it's always for the children, children are our future, wouldn't they have spent some time thinking through the consequences of something this ubiquitous?
Not when you have billions of dollars to be made. If we know, the World Health Organization, Tucker, last June actually, people probably don't know this, they have now classified gaming disorder as an actual diagnosable illness, okay, here in the United States. So it's an actual disease, an addiction. It's a classifiable disorder. So I guess the question is, we could talk about banning things. Maybe we need labels like we do on cigarettes, that this may be addictive, this may be dangerous for your health. Because when you see kids, I see this on a daily basis, a kid that would be like considered the nicest kid, the teacher's pet. And I'll have parents call me up and they say that, you know, there's like 12 holes in the kid's bedroom because every time they take away a video game or something, the kid freaks out. That's addiction.
So 30 years ago, you heard people use the phrase couch potato. It was considered unattractive at best, immoral at worst, to spend a lot of time passively staring at a screen like a vegetable. People said that all the time. Sure. Far preferable to get outside. You never hear anybody say that anymore. Have we given up on that idea?
I'm afraid, I fear that we have. I mean, our kids are more sedentary than ever before in history, and that's why we have an obesity epidemic among kids. That's one of the reasons. And the other issue here, Tucker, is that the natural habitat for a child is the creative world. Being outside, making shapes out of clouds, scraping your knees, having fun, throwing a ball against the wall. It's not about sitting in front of a screen. That's not in our human nature. It's not in the natural development for our kids. It's not what works for them. It's not what they're supposed to be doing.
Last question. Do we know the effects on the developing brain of spending 3, 4, 5 hours a day playing video games?
Sure. There's a lot of, all the research, my book has covered all of this, okay? And there's a lot of research since then that has come out. It's called brain neuroplasticity. And essentially what will happen is the brain, whenever engaged in anything highly stimulating for 3 or more hours per day, it will grow neural pathways to adapt to that environment. The problem is when it adapts to the cyber world, it unadapts. It can unadapt to the real world. And that's why we're seeing so many issues with kids with poor coping skills, kids coming out of college that can't interview well during a job interview, and social skills problems and so forth.
Interesting. Tom Kirsting, one of the few people thinking seriously about this. We always appreciate it. Thank you. Joe Biden is refusing to apologize for hugging people. Washington is going berserk over that. We'll bring you the latest after the break. It's been 2 weeks since Robert Mueller finished his investigation and found what many suspected, well, a few suspected, but some of us suspected it pretty vehemently from the very beginning. There was no collusion between the Trump campaign and the government of Russia. So to that extent, the case is closed. But members of Mueller's team want to continue the allegations. In a series of leaks to the New York Times, they have complained that the report, despite finding no criminal activity, should be released because it is, quote, damaging to the White House. In other words, prosecutors working for the federal government no longer see their job as enforcing the law. Instead, the point is a political vendetta and an attempt to influence narratives about people they dislike. How does it make you feel? Is that a proper role of a prosecutor working for the federal government? Glenn Greenwald co-founded The Intercept, and he joins us tonight. Glenn, thanks very much for coming on. What do you make of this most recent New York Times story about what apparently is in the report we haven't seen?
Well, it's similar to the journalism that has fueled the 3-year hoax that has drowned U.S. discourse, namely that the New York Times, the Washington Post gives anonymity to totally unknown people to make claims that are completely bereft of any specifics, unaccompanied by any evidence whatsoever, so that it's impossible to analyze. And then journalists see it and then start celebrating online on social media and cable news as though it's some sort of a smoking gun. I don't really have personally any problem with having the Mueller report published, since I don't think that in this case a special counsel is just acting as a prosecutor. They're also there to say what actually happened. I think we'd all benefit from that, so that we no longer have to have CIA leaks trying to manipulate our brain. But the one thing we do know, Tucker, about this report, like we know very little, but the one thing we do know that they've said is that these complaints from these anonymous leakers, whoever they are, these anonymous objectors, they're not complaining about the section of Barr's letter that reported that Mueller found no collusion. They're only complaining about the part where Mueller said it's impossible to say one way or the other whether Trump obstructed justice. So it's amazing that actually the part about the no collusion got bolstered, because even these malcontents who are complaining to the New York Times anonymously are saying we don't have a problem with the section finding no collusion. We only have a problem with the obstruction issue.
What about all the people over the last 2 years who've been dismissed, and you're one of them, as agents of the Russian government? Where's the justice for them? Where do they get their reputations back?
I think one of the things that we've seen over the last 2 or 3 years is that journalism, more than ever, is a profession of complete groupthink and mob rule, in part because it's really difficult to be a journalist these days because of financial constraints. Big media outlets are laying off huge numbers of people. So if you're a young journalist, the last thing you want to do is stick your head up and challenge the prevailing consensus, because you could lose your job, or if you lose your job, it'd be really hard to get another job. And also Twitter makes it so that journalists constantly talk to one another and create these sort of gangs that are designed to punish anybody who challenges their orthodoxies. And I think journalism has completely disgraced itself at the exact time that they're claiming that a grave danger to the republic is that Trump is demeaning journalists. They've done more to demean their profession with this behavior, calling people Russian agents who question them, or Trump supporters, or apologists, or denialists. They have a whole long line of accusations and new terms to stigmatize anyone who questions their dissent. And it's really effective for a lot of people who, unlike us, don't have established platforms, and it's been really effective to prevent them from being questioned or challenged.
So here's a question I want to ask you for 2 years. You're making your critique from the left. You're on the left, and you're not a Trump fan. That's a tough position to take, and you've maintained it this whole time. Why were you able to maintain an independent perspective on this when so many others weren't?
You know, it's amazing, because if you think about it, the question, is there evidence to demonstrate that there was collusion between the Trump campaign and the Russian government, is completely bereft of ideology. It doesn't matter whether you're on the left or the right. You're just looking at evidence. It's just an epistemological question. And one of the things that has happened is that everything is so tribalized. So they actually want you, if you're to maintain your good standing on the left, to lie. They're demanding you lie. They're demanding you say that you see evidence and you see a convincing case for a conspiracy theory, even if you don't really see it. And I have to say that, unlike establishment journalists like Jeremy Scale, Matt Taibbi, and myself, who have the protection of being established, there were a lot of young journalists like Michael Tracy and Aaron Mate and a bunch of others who are very vulnerable, who have the courage to incur the wrath of this profession in order to do what journalists should do, which is to say what it is that they think without any fear of who it angers, and very few of them are willing to do that, and they deserve a lot of credit for that.
I agree completely. We've had Tracy on the show a number of times, another brave journalist. Glenn Greenwald, thank you very much.
Okay, thanks, Tucker.
Joe Biden is not apologizing for hugging people. Press is mad about that. After the break, we'll bring you the latest. In the Inside Show, we showed you all the Democratic candidates appearing at Al Sharpton's extremely tax-exempt conference to pay homage to him. They weren't the only ones there. Young pioneer Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez came too. She didn't come just to prostrate herself before Emperor Al. She was also there to test out a brand new accent, one you probably haven't heard her put on before. Listen to this.
The fight's been long, y'all. This is what organizing looks like.
That's right.
This is what building power looks like. I'm proud to be a bartender. Ain't nothing wrong with that.
Ugh. Oscar-worthy? We'll let you decide. AOC has issued a statement. I am from the Bronx. That's how I talk. Yeah, it's not how you talk, actually. We played a lot of clips of Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. She didn't talk like that in a single one of them. That's fake. That's what that is. Well, for the second week in a row, there was a huge amount of news, an explosive amount of news. So what better time to debut a new segment idea, Dan Bongino's News Explosion, where our favorite former Secret Service agent reveals the 3 biggest news stories of the week. The explosive Dan Bongino joins us live. Hey, Dan.
Hey, wow, that's some intro. The news explosion, man. Yeah, Tucker, you really tell you nobody teases a segment like you, brother.
We're going crazy.
That was really
so blow us up
here.
here.
Not disappoint you. All right,
you
so
never
the third
do.
story. Yeah, the third story is rough because being a former police officer, you know, Tucker, very seriously, the worst cases you could ever respond to are missing children. So we have this story where this guy shows up. He pretends to be a child who went missing in 2011, a child by the name of Timothy Pitson, I believe it is. He, of course, turns out is not Timothy Pitson. They have DNA testing. It's a guy by the name of Brian Reaney who has some serious issues, it appears. Just a horrible story, but this was all over the news this week. And just, you know, I've been a former cop. It rips the heart. Why would you do that? You know, people who you get people. Yeah, it was a terrible story. So we had that story. Story number 2, though, is really, I know, an issue close to your heart and an issue close to mine. Listen, this non-crisis crisis at the border is completely out of control. And I say non-crisis with the dreaded air quotes because the Democrats, of course, want you to believe nothing's going on. So I wanted to put this in perspective. I was looking at some stories on this, Tucker. I live in Palm City, Florida. It's not a small town, but it's, you know, it's not New York City where I grew up. It's a lovely place. It's a medium-sized town. We have about 23,000 people. In 12 days, we had to let go 17,000 people in the country illegally in just 12 days who crossed the border. Not vetted. We have no idea who these people are. Basically, the entire population of the town I live in 12 days. But don't worry, Tucker. It's not a crisis. Everybody at ease in the studio. Are you in D.C. today? I don't know. Yeah. Everybody calm down. There's no crisis. Don't worry about it. Everything's A-OK, according to the liberals. I mean, really unbelievable.
But there is no crisis in their world. I mean, that's one of the reasons they can say that with a straight face.
In their gated communities, life is peaches and cream, buddy. No worries at all. Cheap labor, gated communities, no problem here.
No, it's totally true.
We could go on all night about this.
There's a massive class divide in that question. I agree.
You know, I have story number 1, but I got to tell you, I was thinking about changing it after seeing that AOC clip. What is with Democrats and constantly changing the way they talk? Just be genuine. Gosh, what's the deal here? But we have a real number 1.
Wait, let me just ask very quickly. If you were in the audience, how patronized would you feel if someone talked to you like that, mimicked that accent?
Almost as patronized as I would feel when Hillary Clinton said, "We're not that." I can't even do that accent. What was that? Just talk. These are human beings. You don't have to patronize them trying to be something you're not. It's so artificial and phony.
They always do. Yeah.
Speaking of which, story number 1 in the news explosion. I tell you, you tease this segment. I better not disappoint. Joe Biden. Now, listen, I watch your show. I'm not just a guest. I enjoy your show thoroughly. Your interview with Heather McDonald on this topic, Joe Biden and the touching episode, was incredible. And I have to tell you, your opening segment was where you had said, listen, let's not fall into this leftist trap and have this antiseptic, sterile culture.
Right.
You're right. But, Tucker, there's 2 takeaways from this from my perspective. Number 1, where the heck is Barack Obama? Barack Obama, Joe Biden, I'm not a Democrat, but I was a Secret Service agent proudly for Barack Obama. You know, I'm not a bitter Democrat. He won the presidency. You know, I was happy to serve. This guy served with you for 8 years. Where's Barack Obama?
He's
been oddly quiet on this. And second, Tucker, listen, we know the liberal rules are nonsense. Liberal rules are garbage. But if the liberal rules are, and their credo now, is that women are to be believed. Our rule is women are to be respected. Victims are to be heard, absolutely, be investigated. But evidence is to be believed in a due process society.
Exactly.
If the liberal rule is women are to be believed no matter what, then Democrats, if he's your nominee, will expect you to stand on your own principles. Show us what you really believe in and ask Joe Biden to step aside if he wins the nomination. You won't do that, of course, because this is about political power. This really has nothing to do with
You're
what they
totally
want
right on all counts. I do wonder, though, for 8 years, Biden was running around violating feminist law and hugging unwilling huggies, and Obama never said anything about it?
Well, here's the real which is very odd, right? Because he's supposed to be at the tip of the spear of liberal ideology. We're all woke, right? But here's one more thing. One thing. I don't want to take up too much time here, but yeah, listen. This is just creepy, though. He may not have been illegal or anything, but it's creepy, and I think Joe's going to have to deal with the creepy factor. No one likes the close talker, you know.
Dan Bongino, The Explosion. Great to see you.
I hope I didn't disappoint.
You didn't. In the past 2 decades, polar bears have ceased to be mere animals. Instead, they are now talismans, living symbols of mankind's global warming sins, a picture of Dorian Gray, but for the climate. In 2017, a viral video of a starving polar bear reached hundreds of millions around the world. The message was simple. Warming is driving polar bears to extinction. The only way to stop that is to give the left total control over the global economy. But it turns out that polar bears are not dying. They're not endangered. In fact, over the past 50 years, the population of polar bears seems to have quadrupled. Overpopulation is now the problem. Susan Crockford knows a lot about this subject. She's author of the new book, The Polar Bear Catastrophe That Never Happened, and she joins us tonight. Susan, thanks very much for coming on.
You're welcome. It's a pleasure to be here.
So this is news, I think, to most of us who imagine that we're down to our last couple of dozen polar bears. There are more polar bears than there were?
Absolutely. And one of the things that's happened is that back in 2007, we were told that polar bears were acutely sensitive to the effects of global warming. And as it turned out, the bears are much more flexible and resourceful than they were given credit for. One of the reasons that we know this is that it turned out in 2007, the sea ice declined to levels that were not predicted to happen until 2050.
Right.
And they've stayed down at that level for the last 50 or so, or 10 years or so. And so rather than 2/3 of the world's polar bears disappearing in that time, as we were promised would happen, in fact, polar bear numbers have increased.
So you are a zoologist, you know a lot about polar bears. But you've been attacked by many in the climate establishment as a denier, as a subversive person whose voice shouldn't be heard. This seems like a fairly straightforward question. They told us the polar bears were going extinct. You're certain they're not. Why is this controversial?
Well, the original proclamation of polar bears becoming extinct or being threatened with extinction